Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I want to talk to you about the false self of the narcissist. We often hear this mentioned, but what is it really? What does it do? What is it for? The overwhelming majority of pathologically narcissistic people are the adult victims of childhood abuse, often from a narcissistic parent. And by the way, overindulgence and spoiling is abuse. They experience all the same things that victims of narcissistic abuse are familiar with. As a child, it's very difficult for them to psychologically defend against this abuse or to develop normally. Their mind is just too preoccupied with surviving. As a result of that, there are certain key steps in development that seem to be missed. The earlier the abuse or neglect occurs, the worse the problems will be. The inability to separate the self from external objects is probably the biggest missed step. Failure in this area is what results in narcissism and in the lack of formation of identity. The ability to acknowledge, understand, control, and process emotions is another big one. Empathy is not nurtured and doesn't develop. Healthy boundaries don't form. There are problems with schema and object permanence. Basically, we could say their mind does not develop beyond the emotional equivalent of a toddler. They cannot handle their own emotions, they cannot tolerate frustration, and they believe that their well-being is the responsibility of other people. It's very like the way toddlers are. It's the parent's job to assume responsibility for the toddler's emotions and emotional well-being because a child that young can't do it themselves. It's the parent's job to soothe and comfort the baby because the baby can't comfort or soothe themselves. Pathologically narcissistic people cannot do this either. They have primitive defense mechanisms in place instead. One of them, the main one, is the false self. It's all a very technical explanation in some ways, involving the narcissist's inability to separate the self from internal objects, particularly idealized or deified objects, and dealing with self-object transference. But you don't need a technical explanation to understand that when a child is abused, they end up feeling badly about themselves. Their feelings become what they've been told. Essentially, they see themselves the way other people see them, namely their parents. The adult pathological narcissist has never grown out of this immature way of functioning. As a child, they were abused and ended up with horrible feelings of self-hatred and shame. Many people who were abused as children struggle with this also, but as they grow, they are usually able to mature beyond this and develop independent self-esteem. Narcissists are not able to do that successfully. They have no way to challenge their pathologically abusive and negative inner dialogue. It comes through as absolute truth to them, something they have believed their entire lives. Nearly everything they do is an exercise in trying to shut that inner voice up. As children, because they were unable to create true self-esteem and self-worth to counteract this negativity, they created pretend self-esteem and self-worth. The child does not feel safe, and as a reaction to the devaluation and emotional neglect they're subjected to, they begin to focus solely and intensely on themselves in an attempt to deal with the hurt. They begin to overvalue themselves in self-defense to try to balance out the completely negative with the completely positive. They say, "I'm worthless, but I'm not. In fact, I'm the most important thing in the world." This becomes a continuous dialogue with themselves, a war between what they're told and what they're trying to believe in self-defense. Because the abuse usually continues for their entire childhood, this creates a pattern that becomes a way of being. Adult narcissists practice this exact same primitive defense mechanism. They grow into it instead of out of it. Because of their inability to validate their own self-worth and create actual self-esteem, they have no other way to defend themselves. This is where the false self comes in. As the child grows, these beliefs about how horrible and awful they are don't go away. If anything, they're strengthened. Everything bad that happens reinforces it, no matter how silly or even delusional that might seem. Children engage in magical thinking. That means they believe that things happen because of them. Most children grow out of this when they mature, but people who are pathologically narcissistic do not. Even as adults, they still believe everything happens because of them or what they believe or something they did. The pre-narcissistic child wants what all children want, to be loved, to be accepted, to be liked and valued. They find that they cannot achieve these things in their home, and since the parents are idealized, the child believes it's not the parents who are wrong or defective, but that they themselves are. In the movie The Crow, the main character said, "Mother is the name for God in the lips and hearts of little children." This is actually a quote from Thackeray, a British novelist and author, but regardless of where you heard it, it remains true. Parents are seen as perfect and infallible to small children, so if there's a failing, the child will perceive it to be on their own part. If your parents don't love you, you must be very vile. Something must be really wrong with you. This is what the child believes. Because of this, and because they lack a true identity, the child creates a mask that they believe is all the things they are not. This is who they will attempt to present themselves as in order to receive the things they are desperately seeking from other people. It becomes a way of being, a way to circumvent their inability to achieve what they need. No one will love them as they are. They're too horrible, too disgusting, too despicable. But if they can hide that, they might have a chance. Thus, the false self is born. This is who you met when you met the narcissist. This is who shows up in public or with people that don't know the narcissist very well. This is who you spent all your time chasing, trying to find. That's who you were talking about. A mask. It's a person that doesn't exist. Once you see behind that, the narcissist knows the jig is up and they believe they'll be abandoned, even if you don't really understand that what you saw behind was a mask. They feel betrayed and angry. Remember, the false self is not a performance for you or any other people. The false self is for the narcissist. It's the narcissist's protection against their own feelings. It's their way of trying to walk the walk and convince themselves once and for all that they're not all the horrible things they believe themselves to be. They need you to believe it because that helps them believe it. They also believe they will not receive the things they need from people unless they are a good person. This probably goes back to their belief that they were not nurtured or loved by their parents because they could never be good enough. Unfortunately, their definition of a good person is totally unreasonable and they can never achieve it. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has flaws. Nobody's perfect. Because of how they were raised, pathologically narcissistic people believe, as all victims of narcissistic abuse are told, that being a regular human being is wrong and not good enough. Can't have feelings, can't have needs, can't make mistakes, can't have any flaws. Any failure to adhere to this ridiculous belief is seen as an enormous failure on their part. Even small or unimportant mistakes cause the narcissist's negative feelings to pour through and crack their false facade in half. Their feelings overwhelm them, and this is when they engage in abuse, projection, gaslighting, manipulation, and all manner of things designed to help them deny to themselves that they did anything which proved they weren't perfect and therefore not a good person. The biggest problem with the false self is that the narcissist knows it's not real. They are resentful of it and of other people forcing them to use it. They are paranoid someone will see behind it, and they fear the consequences if that happens. They believe they'll be abandoned, and not only do they have a pathological fear of rejection and abandonment, but with no one around to validate their self-worth, they will no longer have a way to defend against the bad feelings. They are desperate to prevent that from happening. That's why a lot of their abuse and manipulation is designed to divert other people's attention away from the narcissist and onto themselves. It's a way of saying, hey, don't look over here, look over there. Anything that threatens this false self with exposure is reacted to as life-threatening, because without it, the narcissist cannot get what they need from other people and will decompensate. It's a knee-jerk reaction of self-defense because they believe they're being viciously attacked. To people who don't understand the personality structure of the narcissist, this is very confusing and even frightening. What the heck are they so mad about? They're more than just angry. They are filled with shame and self-hatred that they can't confront. You dared suggest that they weren't perfect, which means that you have validated their belief that they're bad, that they don't deserve anything, and that they're worthless. This is why people are accused of saying things they didn't say. So you might say, hey, you forgot to take the trash out again. Then they say, that doesn't make me less than you, but you're right, I'm a loser and I never do anything right. And you're like, what? It didn't make any sense to you, but it doesn't have to. Narcissists believe feelings are facts. They feel that way, and that makes it true. Their denial makes them unable to see they're actually projecting their own feelings onto you. You don't think they're a loser and can't do anything right just for forgetting to put the garbage out. They feel that way because any flaw or mistake on their part is seen as a monumental failure. Anyone who's been through narcissistic abuse understands that feeling. It just goes around and around and around. Narcissistic abuse just begets more narcissistic abuse. The false self is the desperate attempt of an immature, childish mind to heal itself from abuse. Their only defense against this is to create a pretend world where it's not true and force everybody else to go along with that. Because of the way they developed, they're not capable of caring about the feelings of other people, nor are they capable of seeing others as human beings who matter. They're also often very, very angry and looking for people to take it out on because this helps them feel more powerful, which boosts their non-existent self-esteem. Basically, it's an abusive situation no matter what. It's a tragic situation all around, and for all the explaining that I've just done here, one phrase probably sums it up the best. Hurt people, hurt people. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by the Little Shaman Healing. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about what the narcissist is really trying to hide. We hear a lot about the false self of the narcissist and how they create this false self to hide behind, but what are they really hiding? Many people think the narcissist's abusive behavior is what they're trying to hide, but it actually isn't. The abusive behavior is something they use to try to keep the fiction in place. The abusive behavior is not what needs to be hidden, in other words. The abusive behavior is just another tool to make sure that what needs to be hidden stays hidden. What they're trying to hide is far more ugly than that, in the narcissist opinion, and they live in fear that other people will see it. So what is it? It's the narcissist's true self, as they perceive it to be. The true self is, of course, not the fake nice one you see, and it's also not the abusive terror that you see either. The true self is a weak, worthless, unlovable monstrosity that has no redeeming qualities at all. This is how the narcissist sees it. You've likely never seen it yourself unless the narcissist in your life has decompensated to the point that they were suicidal, and even then you probably didn't see the actual true self, but more of a reflection of it filtered through their other masks. The true self is generally extremely immature and undeveloped, like a baby. It may not even be able to communicate with other people, which is similar to what we often see with DID, or what we used to call multiple personality disorder. This is what the narcissist is hiding. Something they believe is so ugly, so defective, so deformed, so shame-filled, so repulsive, so hideous and awful that it must be hidden at all costs because anyone who even looks upon it would run away screaming in disgust. This is what they believe they are. It's really no more realistic than their positive view of themselves, but unlike their false self, the false positive self, the narcissist doesn't know that this negative perception is not real. They know their projected self is false because they constructed it specifically in opposition to the true self. The true self is perceived as weak, so the false self was created to be strong, etc. That's why they will go to such extremes to keep the false self in place, including discarding, abusing, or even killing other people who threaten to expose it. The false self is the only barrier between the world and what they think is the truth about themselves. By any means necessary, that true self must be kept away from the world. This is also the reason they're often so paranoid and hypersensitive. If you were walking around living a lie that you thought was going to be exposed any second, you'd be paranoid too. This is why they behave abusively when their narrative is threatened. It's desperation. It's fear. They have been hiding that ugly, horrible core their entire lives, and it's essential to their survival that they keep it that way. We've all heard stories where someone was living a false life, such as pretending they've been going to school to be a doctor or something like that, and they're going to be graduating soon. They play it out as long as they can, but when the date of their supposed graduation gets closer, they become more and more frightened that they're going to be exposed for the loser and the failure that they believe they are. Instead of admitting the truth to their spouse or simply leaving, they kill their spouse because they can't tolerate the shame of exposure. Which is also the reason why they never told their spouse that they stopped going to school in the first place. They would rather their spouse die than find out. Shame is a core part of the narcissistic personality. Not normal shame that you might feel if you did something wrong, and not remorse, but deep-seated pathological delusional shame for who and what they are, which probably stems from their childhood, and it has nothing to do with anything they have or have not done. It's just there all the time. They carry that with them always. Anything that provokes that suffocating pathological shame is reacted to with rage. Threatening their perception and their narrative of things threaten their false self, and this provokes that pathological shame. They react with rage and abuse in an attempt to get the person who is threatening to expose them to back off. This may not even be that person's intention, but because narcissists are so shameful and protective of that core self, they will often overreact with abuse and rage. It's kind of like what we refer to as a guilty conscience, if they actually had a conscience. They fear people are trying to expose them because they know they're hiding something. It's shame-driven paranoia that the false self will be seen through because they know it's false. Everything the narcissist does is designed to protect and hide who they believe they really are, both from the world and from themselves. They live in a very carefully created fiction of illusions, projections, and denials. This is why they're dedicated to misunderstanding you and why they insist that everyone agree with their narrative. The fiction can't work if they're the only ones that buy into it. It can't work if other people keep insisting it's not true. They discard, abuse, gaslight, manipulate, and do everything else in an effort to preserve this very, very fragile fiction. It's really a primitive, childish, and very ineffective defense mechanism because they're reminded of the truth 100 times a day and they are miserable because of it. They cannot measure up to who they want to be, and they can't accept who they really are. This war is going on inside their heads 24 hours a day. It's no wonder they act the way they do. That would drive anybody crazy. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. Once you've been listening to the meditations and more podcasts brought to you by the Little Shaman Healing, that's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I want to talk to you about narcissistic identity, or lack thereof. If you heard the episode of the show entitled Narcissist, Shattered Persona, Split Personality, then you know that the narcissist is not a whole integrated self. They are actually a fractured or splintered, incohesive persona that is unable to function as a unified whole. This is the reason for the Jekyll and Hyde behavior that we often see. They have no identity. Because their perception of themselves is so skewed and unrealistic, they are, in many ways, a stranger even to themselves. They are ignorant of their own flaws, their own talents, and they are unable in many cases to independently form opinions, and they often have serious difficulty making even simple decisions. This lack of basic identity is one of the reasons people with high levels of malignant narcissism are said to have a personality disorder. Identity is one of the key pieces of the formation of personality. Without your identity, you would not know who you are or where you fit in. This is the problem that narcissists face. But why do they have that problem? We know that in most cases, the narcissistic wound, which is the trauma or series of traumas that happen to a person which caused them to develop pathological narcissism in the first place, usually happens at a very young age and is usually the result of abuse, neglect, or both. This causes a fracturing of the original or core personality in the child, similar to the way multiple personalities develop. Because of this, the personality can never be fully actualized into what it was supposed to be or could have been. It has been shattered into many different parts. The child is too busy trying to deal with the abuse or the neglect. Their energy and focus is taken up with defending the self, and as abuse usually continues throughout childhood, this becomes the mind's primary job. Other jobs, such as the emotional development that normal children go through, are stunted or do not occur. This is one of the reasons that narcissists seem so immature and childish. They have very, very arrested development. Many narcissists were also raised by narcissists themselves. Children raised by narcissists are shamed, abused, and shocked out of their own feelings. Their feelings are repressed and pushed out, then replaced by the narcissistic parent's feelings. Consequently, the child never learns to know, understand, or trust their own feelings. They never learn to develop their own opinions or likes or any of the things that make us who we are. They become mimics or chameleons, often imitating others or making up an identity completely. They simply don't have one of their own. Even those narcissists who seem to have a strong personality are usually just emulating someone else. The narcissist learned at an early age that having your own thoughts, feelings, and opinions is dangerous. So they repress them, and as adults, they can be literal strangers to themselves, often unable to make basic choices or answer even simple questions about themselves. They may be unable to answer questions about why they like things, why they do things, or why they believe things. They just do. That's the answer you'll get. I just do. This is probably another reason they use emotion as a guidepost for reality, however illogical that might be. With no identity or internal structure to lean against and rely on, they have only emotion to go by. With no internal ground to stand on and no true guiding force, they're simply flying by the seat of their pants in a world that makes very little sense to them. They have no authentic self to rely on and no way to emotionally understand what's going on or what to do, so they fake it. It would be the same as if a 4-year-old was suddenly saddled with the responsibilities, situations, and decisions that adults have to make. With no idea how to proceed or what to do and no way to get out of the situation, eventually they would just do what they see everybody else doing, even if they didn't understand it. In a nutshell, that's how the adult narcissist lives their life. This leads to problems because identity is how we differentiate ourselves from other people. You're black, I'm white. You're a boy, I'm a girl. You're tall, I'm short. You like classical music, I like metal. You like to wear dresses, I prefer to wear pants, etc., etc. When identity formation is corrupted, this creates an inability to differentiate between the self and others on a very fundamental level. This is part of the reason narcissists see everything and everybody as an extension of themselves, and it's one of the reasons you might notice that they take criticism of things they like very, very seriously and very personally. These things are the only semblance of an identity that they have, and because they see everything and everyone as an extension of themselves, if you're insulting something they like, you're insulting them personally. If you say that you don't like a band or a TV show that they like, that might result in the narcissist stating that that means you don't like them, or that you only dislike these things because they do like them. To a non-narcissistic person, this comes across as very odd and even delusional. But to the narcissist, these things are all they have that even comes close to an identity. They also see you as an extension of themselves, again, because they have no identity, and it's very distressing for them when your thoughts, feelings, and opinions are different from theirs. This is, ironically, often exactly what their parents did to them. This very personal distress creates the feeling in them that things are chaotic and out of control, and that's very difficult for them to tolerate. In response, the narcissist either adopts the other person's opinions, feelings, and basic personality in favor of their own, or rarely they may try to force the other person to adopt theirs. Either way, it's a losing battle for everyone, with the narcissist feeling rejected and oppressed, and the other person feeling attacked by a crazy person who doesn't understand that it's okay for people to think, believe, and like different things. It's an interesting and sad side effect to this behavior that the more narcissists attempt to emulate someone they admire, the more they feel controlled and dominated by that person. This is called engulfment, or a fear of engulfment. This results in anger and accusations from the narcissist and the other person shaking their head in confusion. Narcissists suffer at varying degrees from a fear of rejection that is coupled with this fear of engulfment. That's the reason for the push-pull dynamic of their relationships, or what is often called the idealization devaluation cycle. We can see this most clearly with borderline personality disordered narcissists, but it's generally present in all types of narcissists. When they feel too close and too dominated by the other person's personality, they push back. They have spent their entire lives trying to separate from their parents and their environment and other people, but they've never quite been able to do so, so they try to protect very jealously what little identity they feel they do have. They push the other person away, attempting to create space and individuality, but their identity is actually wrapped up in this other person or these other people, so they feel rejected and frightened by the distance that they themselves have created. This is an endless cycle that can go on for months or even years, with the other person feeling like a yo-yo on a string because of the constant ups and downs created by the narcissist's lack of identity and their inability to distinguish themselves from other people. In the end, this is a very deep, fundamental issue with somebody's personality. The narcissist is like Humpty Dumpty put back together by Dr. Frankenstein. All of the pieces of the original identity were shattered, and so the narcissist has tried to build a new one using bits and pieces taken from other people. The resulting identity is a sad, just monstrous creation that cannot navigate the world around it and that no one can understand at all. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by Earth Mama's Apothecary and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about how pathologically narcissistic people are always in survival mode. If you are dealing with a narcissistic person, this is very important to understand, so I thought we could address it on the show today. People often ask why so many pathologically narcissistic people don't seem to think of the long-term consequences of their behavior. While this is a multifaceted answer, part of the reason for that is because they are in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you are not thinking of 2 years from now, or 2 months from now, or even 2 days from now. All you're focusing on is right now. And the crisis happening right now, getting your needs met right now. Consequences are secondary in survival mode. We can't worry about consequences right now because all that matters right now is surviving. If at some point in the future we are no longer in survival mode, maybe we can think about the consequences then. The problem is that doesn't happen. There is no future. There's only now and the endless crisis of need. People dealing with pathologically narcissistic loved ones often feel like they're stuck in Groundhog Day, where it's just the same thing over and over and over again. There's always a problem. There's always a crisis. There's always an emergency. Or conversely, there's never a crisis and never an emergency because the narcissistic person doesn't care about anything at all. The narcissist never seems to get tired of this. It's like they don't even realize it, and it's safe to say they probably don't. To them, it seems that every day is a fresh horror, filled with losses and landmines and the desperate search for self-worth and fulfillment. The focus is on just making it through day-to-day life. This is something that many of them have a huge amount of difficulty with, and their coping mechanisms are primitive at best. This is one reason why they are so results or reward driven no matter what the cost. For a narcissistic person, the ends justify the means. They're just trying to survive. They need what they need, and anyone or anything that gets in their way is expendable. If you were starving and you needed to steal food to eat so that you didn't die, you would do that. You wouldn't care that you were breaking the law, and you wouldn't care about the situation of the person you were stealing it from. In survival mode, all that matters is your own life. This is how they see things. Their mindset is such that they have to do these things to survive, and when someone exists in that mentality, nothing is off limits. The problem is, narcissists are in survival mode, but they are not in a survival situation. There's no competition for resources, no need to fear that their survival is in question, yet they conduct themselves as if these things are true. They behave as if there are nonstop, imminent threats to their well-being, especially to their emotional well-being. It's not unlike the particular type of food aggression that we see in dogs that have been neglected and starved. This is not the only cause of food aggression in dogs, of course, but it is a legitimate one. If a dog was in an abusive situation long enough, he will have learned that food resources are not stable or reliable. Food might be available now, but it could become scarce at any time, and this puts the dog's survival in jeopardy. Because of this, he will gobble any food he's given or that he finds as fast as possible, and if someone tries to take the food away, the dog will growl and he will bite in order to protect his resource. This dog is in survival mode. He doesn't know when or if his next meal will ever come, so he feels an urgency and an anxiety about food all the time. He has learned that he cannot trust in a reliable source of food, therefore he secures as much as he can, as fast as he can, and if anyone interferes, even people that he loves, they will be dealt with aggressively. Another dog that tries to eat the food or dares to even come near it will be attacked or maybe even killed. This is how the dog attempts to cope with what he has learned about life. Survival mode takes over so that his needs can be met. He's attempting to protect and secure his resources because he doesn't know if he's ever going to have them again. Humans are not all that different from this. We learn things the same way, and we are imprinted by previous experiences the same way, especially early ones. Narcissists don't know when or if their needs will ever be met, and they believe they are helpless to attend to those needs on their own, so they feel a continuous urgency and an anxiety about their needs all the time. Their constant focus is, what about me? For whatever reason, early on, they seem to have learned that they cannot rely on other people to care about them, and they have compensated for this by focusing exclusively on their own needs, to the exclusion and the detriment of everything else, in the panicked belief that not to do so means these needs will never be met. This results in narcissistic people attaching astronomical importance to their own needs and perceiving any deviation from this as an attack and a rejection. Unable to attend to their own needs, they insist that others attach the same importance to their needs that they do. When this doesn't happen, it reinforces the idea that they are in a fight for their survival. No one will care about me if I don't care about myself. No one will care about my needs if I don't make them care. No one will recognize my needs if I don't force them to recognize my needs. Of course, in a healthy relationship of any kind, this is not necessary. However, the pathologically narcissistic person generally does not recognize this. They are locked into a certain way of being, a certain mode of operation. They know no other way to be, and to abandon that would be tantamount to saying their needs don't matter at all. For most narcissists, the only way they see out of survival mode is death. The idea that there is another way to live is totally foreign to them. It's like if someone was trying to tell you to breathe through your ears. It sounds preposterous, and more than that, it sounds impossible. To the pathologically narcissistic person, it also sounds like a trick. You're trying to get them to stop focusing on their needs so that their needs are not met. Now, it seems easy enough to fix this, right? Just show them that they're not in a survival situation and that they're safe. Poof, survival mode disengaged. But it's not that easy. All facts that support positive interactions with people are either twisted, reframed, or ignored by the narcissist's perception and the way that their mind works. All facts that support negative interaction and threats to survival are maximized, misperceived, and exploited. This is what happens when someone is hyper-focused on their own needs and is unable to focus on anything else. Everything is perceived as being about or to or because of themselves. There's also the matter of being unable to attend to their own needs. This is a cause of huge anxiety and alarm in pathologically narcissistic people. Again, we can look to our example of the abused dog. He cannot secure his own source of nourishment. He must wait for someone to give it to him. If he could get out of his cage, perhaps he could find his own food, but this is beyond his ability. He must simply wait, pathetically at the mercy of other people's whims. It is the same for the pathologically narcissistic person. If they could get out of the, quote, cage of their defense mechanisms and circular logic, perhaps they would realize that they can do things like self-soothe and create self-worth on their own for themselves. But for whatever reason, they cannot get out. They feel that they're like that abused dog, waiting for someone to bring whatever scraps they feel like throwing. And more often than not, in the narcissist perception, no one comes. They are resentful of this, and even more resentful of the fact that they're relying on other people in the first place. The very fact that this has to happen underscores and accentuates their perceived weakness. If you are dealing with a pathologically narcissistic person, remember that you are likely dealing with someone who believes they are in a daily struggle for survival, who believes they are in resource competition with any and everybody around them, and who is mightily resentful of this fact. They believe that everything they do is justified because of these things. When you are just trying to survive, how can you be blamed for anything that you have done? How could you do any differently? And for the narcissistic person, everything leads back to survival. Their manipulations, their lies, their rage, their false self, everything. This is why everything is such a big deal. Even stupid things that appear to have no connection to survival at all are very significant to the pathologically narcissistic person. Every time they are told no or denied anything, it reinforces the idea that they are in this alone and must fight tooth and nail for everything they get against a world that is literally trying to kill them. Every time they are asked to consider another person, it reinforces the idea that they're unimportant and worthless. Every time someone will not buy into their projections and their false image, it reinforces the idea that they are too damaged to be loved or to matter. Small things have huge implications in the mind of the pathologically narcissistic person. The fiction that they depend on is so fragile that even the tiniest thing could upset the whole structure, and down it goes. This is something that represents literal death in the mind of many pathologically narcissistic people, and something they will avoid at all costs. If you are dealing with a narcissistic person, realize that the stakes are very high for them in everything. This is not a game where they can allow any other winner but themselves. If Fox is chasing Rabbit, who's going to run faster? Rabbit, because Fox is only running for his dinner. Rabbit is running for his life. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online and over the phone Monday through Friday, so if you're interested in speaking with me, you can visit littleshaman.org and click the Book an Appointment tab to do that, or you can use the link that's available in the information section of this video. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you, and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about mirroring in narcissistic relationships. This is extremely common in relationships of all types that involve pathologically narcissistic people, so I thought we could talk about it on the show today. As most of you know, pathologically narcissistic people have significant trouble with their identity. Often their self-concept or idea of themselves is very unstable. It can swing wildly back and forth between extremes, and they may seem to change their personality based on who is around or what they're being influenced by. For example, a narcissistic person who is reading a series of books or watching a show on TV may begin to act or speak like the main character in an attempt to imitate them. If they have a new circle of friends, they may very quickly adapt their likes, dislikes, interests, and even speech patterns to reflect the likes, dislikes, interests, and speech patterns of the people in the group, even if these things result in the narcissist becoming completely opposite of who they seemed to be before. A person who seems to be a devout vegetarian among one circle of people may suddenly reverse themselves and start eating meat if they enter into a new group of friends. A person who champions civil rights and equality may suddenly begin using racist stereotypes and slurs if they start dating a person who holds these types of views. They may begin dressing differently, listening to different music, or changing any number of things about themselves that most people consider to be pretty consistent about personality. This unstable chameleon-like behavior is often frustrating and confusing for the narcissistic person's loved ones. They wonder if they ever really knew this person or if they know them now. They may express this frustration and confusion to the narcissistic person, asking why they can't just be themselves or what happened to the person that they know. They may ask, "Who are you?" This is a very good question, and it's one that pathologically narcissistic people often don't really have an answer to. If you feel like you don't really know this person anymore, you're probably not far off. The truth is, there is really no one to know. The person you believed you knew was more than likely no more genuine than the, quote, new personality you're seeing now. Because they have such issues with self-concept and identity, narcissists often have no real self. All you are likely seeing, and all you have ever seen, are the reflections and stolen pieces of other people, including you. One of the most common things people in romantic relationships with narcissists say is, "In the beginning, I could not believe how alike we were. We believed all the same things. We agreed on everything." Yes, you did, because the narcissist was mirroring you. They were simply reflecting back to you what you were showing them. In return, you reflected approval and validation and positive things back to them. It's like holding a mirror up to another mirror, and all you see is an endless maze of reflections. They reflect back to you what you're putting out there so that you will reflect positive attention and approval back to them that they then attempt to turn into some semblance of self-worth. This is essentially what some people call narcissistic supply. Unfortunately, it's not true self-worth, because true self-worth does not rely on what other people think of you or how they react to you. True self-worth has nothing to do with other people. So because it's not actual self-worth, it doesn't stick, it doesn't last. It lasts about as long as it takes for a negative thought about themselves to come into their mind, and then they need more. Once what the person is reflecting back to the narcissist changes and is no longer quite so positive, or once the narcissist feels it has changed, the false sense of worth they were propping themselves up with evaporates. This is when you often see devaluation and even being discarded. Pathologically narcissistic people simply cannot handle this change in reflection. They can't face the reality of what they believe they are, and they believe they will be humiliated and rejected because of that. They believe they will be abandoned, and they often leave the situation first in order to make sure that that does not happen. Other narcissistic people may not leave the situation, but they abuse and punish the other person for the same exact reasons. They cannot handle the humiliation, rejection, and abandonment they believe will occur when they are no longer seen by the other person as perfect. Narcissistic people need to mirror others because they have no true sense of self. If they have nothing to mirror, they are often lost. They often have extreme difficulty reading other people's emotions and their own, so they really have nothing they can use as a reference point. When left to their own devices, they may misread other people's emotions very badly, projecting and inferring all manner of emotional states onto other people that have nothing to do with reality or anything that has actually happened. They also seem to have trouble understanding anything other than rudimentary basic emotions. These would be emotions like fear, anger, sadness. When asked how other people might be feeling, the answers are often very, very general and non-specific, like the way a little kid would answer: bad, sad, mad, happy. It's usually the same when they're asked how they feel. They may have no insight at all into how they truly feel or why they feel that way. Now, pathologically narcissistic people may sometimes use language that indicates they have a more complex emotional understanding, but when asked to describe or define these things, they're often unable to do so. As with so many other things they say, it's as if they heard it somewhere in the same context and are simply using it without understanding what it means. And they may very well be doing exactly that. If pressed, they may even look the word up and simply repeat the definition as it's written. If you ask them to translate the definition into their own words, again, they're often unable to do that. They are simply mirroring the language they have heard other people use in similar situations. Children learn by mirroring adults. Through the fullness of time with appropriate caregiver modeling and the development of insight, among other key components of self-reflection and maturity, they learn why they're doing the things they're doing, why they're feeling the things that they are feeling. It seems that for whatever reason, pathologically narcissistic individuals have been unable to do that. Their development has not progressed to that point. They are stuck simply mirroring to try and survive because without the information reflected back from others to use as a guidepost, things become very difficult for narcissistic people. This is one of the reasons that the gray rock method can diffuse narcissistic rage. It's also one of the reasons it can provoke it. When you employ the gray rock method, you don't react. You don't reflect anything back to them. Therefore, you are giving the narcissistic person nothing to go on. There was a study done recently about how narcissists feel stress, where narcissistic people were told they were going to give a presentation to a group of human behavior experts. The people in the audience were not human behavior experts. They were part of the experiment, and they were specifically told not to reflect anything back to the speakers, either positive or negative. With nothing to feed off of or mirror, the narcissistic people giving the presentations became very stressed out, much more so than non-narcissistic people who were in the same situation. The end result of the experiment showed that narcissistic people can experience stress much more powerfully than those who are not narcissistic, but the source of the stress is very important to the topic we're discussing now. With no one reflecting anything back to them, the narcissists involved in this experiment experienced serious discomfort. Since studies have also shown that people with high narcissism have much greater difficulty assessing both their own and other people's emotions, not reflecting anything to them at all leaves them with nowhere to go. This is why when you ask a narcissist an open-ended question or give them a choice and they are given no clues as to what the quote right thing might be, they often cannot answer you. They may avoid the question, deflect, invoke sarcasm, or otherwise dodge answering completely. You have asked an empty shell to make a decision or to answer, and with nothing to use to guide themselves, they cannot do so. Who am I? What makes me me? Where am I coming from? Why did I do that? How do I feel? These are all questions that pathologically narcissistic people may have nothing but the most basic answers for. Many may have no answers at all. They are simply existing in a world they cannot emotionally navigate, trying to get their needs met and make it through life minute by minute without falling apart. If you are in any type of relationship with a narcissistic person, whether they are your spouse, your child, your parent, your sibling, remember that your function in this relationship is to provide whatever reflection they can turn into their fleeting version of self-worth and to provide personality traits they can mimic. That's it. You are the mirror that they stand in front of, alternately admiring themselves, hating themselves, preening, frowning, pouting, smiling, raging, crying, laughing, posing. There really is no more to it than that. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online and over the phone Monday through Friday, so if you're interested in speaking with me, visit littleshaman.org and click the Book an Appointment tab to go ahead and do that. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about a common misconception I hear all the time regarding narcissists, and that is about their feelings for themselves. People often say, no, they don't hate themselves, they love themselves. That's what narcissism is. Not exactly. Narcissism is malignant self-love. That means toxic or poisonous. And it's really a misnomer because it's the opposite that's true. Narcissists are pathologically focused on themselves and their own needs. That's definitely true. But this doesn't translate into love. It's need. That's all they have and all they understand. This is hard for other people that are not narcissists to understand because their internal experiences are more evolved and sophisticated than that. The narcissist's internal experiences are not evolved and sophisticated. They are primitive and immature. It's like a child, a really young one. I want, I need, that's it. To put it another way, you don't take breaths because you love yourself. You take breaths because you have to in order to stay alive. It's just a reaction caused by your need for air. The narcissist works the same way. Now you might say, a lot of the things they freak out over are not needs like air or food. Air and food are important. And that's true. They do freak out over stuff that's really silly. But that's where the self-hatred comes in. The narcissists hate themselves so badly that they don't believe they deserve anything, not even to live in some cases. As a way to try and counter the horrible feelings that come with that belief, they have created an opposite belief in themselves. And this one says that they deserve everything. Remember, the black and white thinking, it's either black or it's white. There's no in the middle, there's no in between, there's no gray area. I don't deserve nothing, I deserve everything. And I say, quote, created this second opposing belief because it's not a true belief. It's just a smokescreen, it's a fake. It's a defense mechanism against the seriously toxic self-hatred these people are drowning in all the time. So what happens is, the idea that they deserve everything is fake, and therefore it's very fragile. When they don't get any one of the things in the category of everything, it destroys that very frail fiction, and it reiterates the idea that they deserve nothing. Because this idea that they should have literally everything is ludicrous, unrealistic, and unreasonable, they are confronted with the truth and the reality of their self-hatred over and over again every time they can't have something. These feelings overwhelm them, and because they have such poorly formed and immature defense systems against things like that, they just melt down. It's the worst thing that ever happened, and because of that, they truly feel like they can't exist. This fiction is all that stands between them and suicide. When it gets disrupted, that is very dangerous for them, and they react that way. To us it seems stupid, but to them it's extremely threatening. That's why they melt down. They can't do anything else. Their entire being is focused on pretending that those things, those feelings, are not true. It's like a toddler having a tantrum over spilled milk. The child cries because they don't understand that there's more milk and it can be cleaned up, it's not that big of a deal, etc. In other words, they cry because their understanding of the world is very immature, and so are their emotions. They have no control over their emotions or their behavior. The only difference is a toddler does not feel self-hatred. They are simply responding to emotion and need. The milk got spilled and they wanted it. Now they feel bad and sad and they're going to scream and cry about it. Most children will grow out of this behavior as they learn to control their emotions and as their understanding of the world increases. This does not happen for the narcissist. Instead of growing out of that behavior, they grow into it. One of the big reasons for this is that narcissists are attacked 24 hours a day by a sadistic, vicious superego that assaults them with cruelty, lies, and insults just nonstop. Think of the kind of things they say to you. They're hearing that and worse in their own heads constantly. And it's troubling to me because many people seem to be happy to learn that, and while it's understandable to hate the narcissist, if the narcissist hadn't been hearing that voice 24 hours a day for their entire lives, they probably wouldn't act the way that they do. That's the voice they're listening to instead of you when you try to explain that they're wrong about how you feel and what you did and what you said. That's the voice that tells them you hated them since the day you met them, that you're evil, and that you're trying to control, manipulate, and destroy them. Every single thing they do is a defense mechanism against that voice and the overwhelming feelings that it creates within them. Being happy it exists seems a little counterproductive. Just food for thought. At any rate, the grandiose expectations, the hysterical tantrums, the complete and total self-focus, and every single maladaptive behavior we observe in the narcissist is the result of trying to deny the self-hatred that little voice provokes in them. The superego's voice says, "You're garbage, you're trash." Then the narcissist responds with, "I'm not garbage, I'm extremely valuable, I matter a lot." The superego's voice says, "Nobody cares about you, you're worthless." The narcissist responds with, "I am the most important thing." The superego's voice says, "You deserve nothing, you're scum." The narcissist responds with, "I deserve everything, I'm the best there is." The superego's voice says, "You're stupid, you're dumb." The narcissist responds with, "I'm highly intelligent, other people are stupid. I can prove that because I fool them and I manipulate them and I trick them." Everything they do is trying to shut that little voice up and prove that it isn't true. The superego voice says, no one wants you. The narcissist responds with, everyone wants me. Look at all these people that I've slept with. And on and on and on and on that way. If you look at the narcissist behavior with this understanding, it all falls into place. But even if someone doesn't understand any of this psychological mumbo-jumbo type of stuff, there's no way that you can take a serious look at a narcissist behavior and conclude that this is a person with balanced self-esteem who cares for themselves at all. People who love themselves do not behave the way that narcissists behave. It just does not happen. People who love themselves don't sabotage their own efforts on a regular basis. They don't cause horrible problems in their own lives for no reason. They don't destroy good relationships, tank good jobs, turn loved ones against them, alienate their children, over-medicate themselves on drugs and alcohol, embarrass themselves repeatedly. People who love themselves do not do these things. These things happen because the narcissist is so poisoned with self-hatred. They spend their entire lives trying to pretend that that's not true and hide from these feelings because they can't handle them, but the facade is so thin that as soon as any little thing happens that contradicts it, the whole thing just falls apart. I've had people ask me, who are they trying to kid? And the question is facetious, of course, they're not really being serious, but the answer is deadly serious. They are trying to fool themselves. In a very real way, literally, they're trying to fool themselves into being able to buy into this fake image that they're portraying. They don't want to believe that little voice. People often think the narcissist is trying to fool them, but they're not. Not really. They're trying to fool themselves. It has nothing to do with anybody else. Even at the height of their most abusive behavior, even with smear campaigns and gaslighting and everything else, the motive has nothing to do with you or anyone else. It's about getting some relief from that toxic, smothering self-hatred. And that's it. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you and have a wonderful day.